Today we are going to start with international relations. This is for general studies, that is for general studies section. And in general studies international relations, today I am going to teach the topic of Indian foreign policy. See, this is again very important chapter in international relations. Whenever we say that we are going to study Indian foreign policy, then that is the gist of international relations syllabus of India and the world. So we need to be very careful about this. Okay, so first of all, before going through with Indian foreign policy, we need to understand what is exactly the meaning of foreign policy. What we do mean by foreign policy. I hope you all guys have the idea that what is foreign and what is policy. In a very simple words, foreign policy is described as a sum total of a country's national interest to be represented and achieved in various international forums and negotiations like bilateral, trilateral talks with United Nations, SAARC and many other international forums. Okay. So, the main theme is the representation, what? Representation of we can say national interest. See, this is very core national interest, very core behind the foreign policy, because foreign policy is meant to promote the national interest of any country when it comes in the foreign relations, because whenever any country is going to represent itself outside the world, it is just in the context of national interest that a country's viewpoint has been described. So, we need to be very clear about national interest. Now, we have the other concept here, and that is national interest. We need to understand this. That is national interest. So, we need to understand what is national interest. Okay. See, we need to be very basic here, that what is national interest. National interest is the sum total of a country's requirements when it pertains to its to the fulfillment from the outside world. So, we need to be very careful what is national interest. National interest means a nation's requirements. So, here we need to understand this concept from a very multiple context, like a country's nation's requirement. What are the nation's requirement? We have energy requirements, we have the requirement of investment, money flow from the other countries in our country, we have the requirements to be adequately represented in various international organizations. So this is known as national interest. This is very core to, I should say, this is very core to Indian foreign policy. So we need to understand this, the national interest of a country may vary. Like today, India's national interest lies in fulfilling its energy and economic priorities and promoting alliances like Quad alliances and some more bilateral negotiations and other international institutional interest. So this is all about, we are talking about in foreign policy in the context of national interest. Now, national interest of a foreign policy gets filled via method of diplomacy. Now, this is again very important concept in international relations, and why it is gaining importance just because of its ability to maintain peace and to avoid war. You need to be very careful about this. Another concept is diplomacy. What? Diplomacy. See, diplomacy, we need to understand it very clearly, because this is again very basic to international relations. Diplomacy is an art of negotiation to maximize the possibilities of profits and benefits, and to minimize the possibilities of losses or the negativity. Okay, so we need to understand this. It's an art of negotiation where the aim remains to highlight, to maximize profits. And to minimize losses. That means the aim of diplomacy, the aim of diplomacy is to gain the favorable achievements. Like so ultimately this is a negotiation. This is a process of negotiation. Whenever a country's foreign policy is pursued in any international arena, so this is via process of diplomacy. Even you might have seen that there are many international diplomats. There are many international events where a country send their diplomats, their representatives. Okay, their representatives to negotiate, so that we can gain the favorable deals in our favor. You're getting this point? So this is all about diplomacy. So in nutshell, we can say a foreign policy is the aggregate representation of national interest in the various international forums via methodology of diplomacy. You understand this? Okay. Now we are going to proceed further. We are going to start with the ethical aspects of foreign policy. What? Ethical aspects of foreign policy. With regard to India, so we can say ethical aspects of Indian foreign policy, that is foreign policy. All right. So whenever we say Indian foreign policy, then we have something other to say, that ethical aspects are the moral foundations which are running today's basis of India's foreign policy. That means the time we gained independence in 1950s, 47, after 47 until 1950s, so the kind of manipulations, the kind of basis we adopted to pursue our policy outside the world, that made the test of the time to formulate our successful foreign policy. That means that we had some ethics to be followed in our foreign policy, and I hope that those ethics really proved us beneficial at that point of time. So the first in the lieu is Panchsheel. What? Panchsheel. I hope you have an idea about Panchsheel. This is very widespread concept, very well known concept, that what is Panchsheel. See, these are the 5 virtues. What? These are the 5 virtues. These are the 5 set of principles, and those were the proved principles that India put forward to the world. Okay, that now we need these principles for peace, for development, to consider the world as a family. Okay, and you know, because at that point of time I still able to recall that the world was divided into 2 power blocks. One was led by United States and Europe, and the other was led by USSR, that is Russia. Okay, so at that point of time we really did not intend to be a part of any power blocks, and we felt completely aloof to be maintained so as to pursue a purposeful foreign policy. So that is why we can say that in 1954 the Tibet region of China and India signed a Panchsheel agreement. Okay, and it was ultimately an agreement of peace. I can say an agreement of peace. First ingredient of this was mutual respect. Listen carefully. That is mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We need to understand this from a different point of view. The first principle of Panchsheel is mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. So this is again, these 2 concepts are very important when it comes on the mutual respect. It means that whosoever country is in the world, they must respect each other's territory and their integrity as well. They should not try capturing others' territory. They should respect it, and you know what, this is again very important, that this term sovereignty, the meaning of sovereignty is decision making. What? Decision. So that decision should be free. That should be free from any influence. Free from any influence. That is free from any influence. That means we should not try to pressurize any country with regard to its decision making. We should not try to pressurize, we should not try to influence any country, so that these principles should be maintained. The second principle is mutual non-aggression. That is again very important with regard to prevent any war. That is mutual non-aggression. We need to understand this. What is this? See, that means any country should not wage any aggression and should not involve itself in any kind of aggressive activities against other. That means not to involve in any aggression. Fine. So this is again very important, because at that point of time, you know, the whole world was divided into power blocks, the two power blocks, as I have already discussed, between USA and USSR, and that bloc was trying to create an aggression between the countries. So that is why the Panchsheel emphasizes on non-aggression policy, so as to maintain the equilibrium of peace within the countries. All right. So the third principle is that is mutual non-interference. What? Mutual non-interference. Fine. Now, what is this mutual non-interference? See, whenever we say mutual non-interference, that means that no country should interfere into the affairs and proceedings and decisions of other countries. That should be very clear out policy, because as we have already seen that many countries kept on trying to interfere into the policies and trying to make one country enemy of another country, as we have seen throughout the Cold War and after 1950s, that how the superpowers tried to interfere into the politics of South Asia, and that is how they were able to maintain struggle, conflicts in the South Asia, so that they will be able to maintain their hegemony, their powerful aspects, and they can impose their dictums in South Asia. So that is why it means not to interfere, fine. So not to interfere into the affairs of other country, of others. I think this is very clear concept. Okay. Next the fourth is equality and mutual benefit. What? Equality and mutual benefit. Mutual benefit. So this is again a very progressive concept. This on one hand underlines the importance of one country at par with another country. Likewise, if we say we have a country like Nigeria, so the rights of the Nigeria, the status of the Nigeria is equivalent to the status of United States as well. So that means that they should be dealt with the policies of equality throughout the world. What? We are talking about policy of equality. See, this is very important concept while defining the IR, that equality of relations. What? Equality of relations. And this is directly connected with the United Nations. What? The United Nations. See, listen very carefully, very carefully, that previously, once the United Nations was formed in 1945, at that point of time there were 5 superpowers, okay, and those were the nuclear equipped superpowers. And slowly, once the newly independent nations like the third world nations came into existence, so they were ultimately got independence from their former colonial masters. So these masters were already having a dominance on the world resources. So ultimately these newly independent nations needed some help from their colonial masters, from these developed countries. So that is why the concept of equality highlights one thing, that in every aspects there should be equality. If decision has been taken with regard to any world policy, the developing, underdeveloped and the developed ones, they should try making a consensus among them, try making a consensus. So ultimately it talks about consensus at global level. What consensus is at the global level? This is again very important concept. Now the concept is of mutual benefits. What mutual benefit? What is mutual benefit? Again, this is very important. See, if there can be a benefit of two countries, okay, whether they be a developed one, whether they be underdeveloped one, whether they be developing ones, so they should have it any agreement on the grounds of mutual benefit, that it should benefit to you and to us as well. That is the reason why the principle of mutual benefit was incorporated in the Panchsheel. Now the fifth and the last is peaceful coexistence. What? That is peaceful. Peaceful coexistence. So what is this peaceful coexistence? See, we have a United Nations Human Rights Charter which says that peaceful settlement of disputes. What? Peaceful settlement of disputes. Peaceful settlement of disputes. See, we believed in peaceful coexistence. That is again can be highlighted into the United Nations concept of collective security, and there can be other concepts like we must solve any disputes with the peaceful methods, with the methods of negotiation. What? Or we can call it as a diplomacy as well. What? Diplomacy. That's why I was saying that diplomacy is one of the very significant tool in international relations for the restoration of peace and democracy, as well as to avoid war, because if diplomacy is there, there is no war, and again diplomacy is very expensive as well. All right. So we need to understand this, that is peaceful coexistence, that we should live and let live. Okay, we want to develop together. What? We want to develop together. Okay, not confined to these Panchsheel principles only. India's approach in terms of foreign policy also can be highlighted in terms of its selfless help. What? Selfless help. This is again very important. We need to understand this. What is this selfless? That is selfless assistance, selfless help towards protecting the democratic values throughout the world, and this is done only by creating capacity building programs in those countries which are very perverted, which are backward, okay, creating infrastructure in those countries, providing humanitarian reliefs in those countries. So India has done really a lot, a lot, because India is the only country who has contributed largest in the United Nations peacekeeping forces. You are getting this point? In the UN peacekeeping forces. Secondly, we have always raised our voice for the poor countries, and specifically if I quote an example of Afghanistan, so I must mention that India has the largest stake in Afghanistan when it comes on the capacity building, infrastructure building, roads building, school buildings. So really we are doing very well in Afghanistan, which was left backward after the war between United States and Russia, because ultimately it became a sandwich. Afghanistan became a sandwich as the result of the Cold War between the US and USSR. So we came forward to help Afghanistan in this regard. So we must understand this concept from a very broader context. Okay. So next is next are the I'm going to quote the current challenges. The current challenges to Indian foreign policy. There can be many challenges. There can be every foreign policy, every year we have numerous challenges in when it comes on pursuing any external policies. Okay, and when it comes on India, so we have some highlighted foreign policies concerns, like we had a Ukraine crisis. We have a crisis like rise of China. Okay, we have a Rohingya crisis. Okay, we have a a concern like balancing ties with United States and China, United States and Russia. Again, we have a biggest challenge of combating terrorism. Okay, and we have securing our energy needs. We have shaping relations with Africa. We have protection of India's interest in the Indian Ocean region. We have the interest of our persons of India's origin outside the world. So there is a list going on when it comes on towards the challenges. Okay, we have their remedies as well. So this is again a very complex issue which we need to simplify right now. The first challenge before the Indian foreign policy, which we just had it right now, is the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine crisis. Okay, we know what is Ukraine crisis? I hope this is a very dominating concept in international relations these days, because we know that the Russia is central in the Eurasian region, and by going against Russia, we can harm our interest in the region. See, Russia is center of Eurasian. Okay, so ultimately that is the main reason why Russia is very important for India. Okay, Russia is very important for India, and we cannot overlook Russia, because Russia always helped us in our need of time. Okay, and simply we cannot be moral in this regard and realist, and cannot avoid the realist standpoint, which is again very essential to be opted. That means that what is the realist standpoint? That India always refused to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. India always refused. Whenever there was a voting in United Nations, whenever there was a voting, United Nation voting, so India abstained. What? India abstained. Fine. India abstained from voting, and that was the reason that shows our tilt towards Russia. Even afterwards, that India refused to, in this regard, what is important in the Ukraine crisis, that what is India's standpoint in Ukraine crisis, what we did to balance this kind of crisis, because if there is any concern in the world, wherever there is any concern, what is important, that what is India's standpoint on that, okay, what is India's view over that. So that's what I am explaining, that India abstained from UN voting, and India refused to join any sanction. This is again very important. India refused against any sanctions